There is a particular kind of silence that exists only in government buildings after hours. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of things that are not supposed to be heard. Thomas Reeves had been sitting inside that silence for 11 weeks before he started writing things down. Not because anyone told him to, not because there was a form for it, because something was wrong and nobody would tell him what. And Thomas Reeves had learned a long time ago, in a different kind of quiet, the kind you find at the bottom of a Belfast street at 2 in the morning with a radio that has stopped working, that when nobody will tell you what is wrong, you write it down yourself and you wait. He was 43 years old. He had served 14 years with the Royal Military Police before a knee injury in Helmand Province ended that particular chapter of his life and opened this one. The transition from active service to ceremonial and protective duty had not been difficult for him the way it was difficult for some men. Some men needed the noise. Reeves had always been more comfortable with the quiet. What he was not comfortable with, what he had never been comfortable with, was the quiet that was hiding something. The chamber he guarded was on the 3rd floor of a building most Londoners walked past every day without looking up. It sat inside the wider administrative labyrinth of Whitehall, connected by 2 corridors to offices that processed parliamentary documentation, the written records of decisions made in committee, amendments proposed and rejected, directives signed and countersigned and archived. The chamber itself was small. 4 walls of pale institutional paint. Steel shelving units bolted to 3 of those walls, floor to ceiling. A single reading table in the center. 2 fluorescent lights overhead, one of which flickered slightly when the building's heating system engaged. A door with a keypad and a secondary manual lock. A chair for the guard posted outside it in the narrow corridor. That chair was Reeves's chair for 6 nights a week, 10 in the evening until 6 in the morning. He had been told the assignment when he transferred to the posting. The chamber contained sensitive parliamentary archive documents. His job was to ensure no unauthorized personnel entered after administrative hours. He would be given a sealed log each evening listing which documents were in the chamber. He was not required to check the documents themselves. That was not his clearance level and not his remit. He was required to ensure the room was secured, to log any entry or exit during his shift, and to hand the shift log to his supervising officer at 6 in the morning. Simple, clean, exactly the kind of assignment that suited a man who had stopped needing things to be exciting. For the first 3 weeks, nothing happened. Personnel came and went during the day. By 10 in the evening when Reeves arrived, the chamber was locked and the corridor was empty. He sat in his chair. He read. He drank coffee from a thermos his wife packed each evening with the same precision she had applied to everything since he'd known her. The coffee was always the right temperature at 2 in the morning, which he had long since stopped questioning and simply accepted as one of the reliable facts of his life. The first time he noticed something wrong, he almost didn't. It was a Tuesday in October. He had arrived at his post at 9:58, 2 minutes early as was his habit. The outgoing guard, a younger man named Patterson who always smelled faintly of the same institutional soap, had handed him the shift log and the sealed document inventory for the chamber. Standard procedure. Reeves had glanced at the inventory as he always did, not reading it carefully, just orienting himself. 3 folders. Reference numbers stamped in the top right corner of the inventory sheet. He had noted the numbers the way you note the weather, present, acknowledged, filed away. At 4:40 in the morning, the heating system engaged and the fluorescent light flickered. Reeves looked up from his book. The corridor was empty. The door was sealed. He looked back at the inventory sheet. He looked at it for a long time. The reference numbers were familiar, not because he remembered them from the beginning of the shift, because he had seen them before, weeks before. He could not have explained why he was certain of this. He was a man who had spent years reading landscapes for information, the angle of a door left ajar, the disturbed ground at the edge of a road, the wrong shadow in the wrong place. He did not always know immediately what he was reading. He knew when something had been read before. He wrote the reference numbers in the margin of the book he was reading, a Tom Clancy novel, as it happened. He thought this was mildly funny and did not mention it to anyone. In the morning, he handed the shift log to his supervisor, a man named Gerald Plum, who had the build and energy of someone who had been a civil servant since before Reeves was born, and intended to continue being one long after Reeves was gone. Reeves mentioned, briefly, that the document reference numbers on the inventory appeared to match numbers he recalled from a previous week. Gerald Plum looked at him over the top of reading glasses that had probably not had their prescription updated in a decade. "Documents are cross-referenced," Plum said. "Same reference can appear on multiple inventories if a document is part of an ongoing review. Standard procedure." "Right," Reeves said. He went home, he slept, he came back. He started paying closer attention to the reference numbers. The second time he noticed something, he was certain. It was not the same documents appearing on multiple inventories. That would have been explainable. What he was seeing was the inventory changing between the evening and the morning. He had no way to prove this because he had not, until this point, been writing down the numbers at the beginning of his shift with any discipline. But he began doing so now. Every evening, as soon as Patterson handed him the shift log and the inventory, Reeves sat down and copied the reference numbers into a small notebook he had purchased from the W.H. Smith near his flat. A black, hard-covered notebook, the kind students use for lecture notes. He dated each entry. He noted the time. He wrote down the reference numbers exactly as they appeared, including any prefix or suffix codes. 3 weeks later, he had enough. The inventories were being changed, not dramatically, not wholesale. One document number altered here, one removed and replaced there. The changes were small enough that a man who was simply sitting in a corridor and not paying any particular attention would never see them. The changes were precisely calibrated to the level of attention a bored guard on a night shift could reasonably be expected to apply. Someone knew exactly how much attention a guard was supposed to pay. Reeves reported this to Gerald Plum. He brought the notebook. Plum looked at the notebook for a long time. Then he looked at Reeves. "You've been copying inventory numbers," Plum said. "Yes. That's not part of your remit." "I didn't alter anything. I copied numbers." Plum looked at the notebook again. He turned a few pages. He set it down on his desk and folded his hands on top of it in the way that men who have spent careers managing other people fold their hands when they want to project calm authority. "The cross-referencing system," Plum said, "generates variant reference strings during certain processing cycles. What you're seeing as a discrepancy is almost certainly a processing artifact. I'll flag it to the document management team. Will I get a response? If there's anything to respond to." Reeves left the notebook on the desk because Plum had not handed it back and he was not going to ask for it twice. He went home. He bought another notebook. He went back to work. This is the part of the story that people find hard to understand later. Not the corruption itself. Corruption is easy to understand. Power, access, money, the usual. What people find hard to understand is the period that came after that meeting. 6 weeks of nothing. 6 weeks of Reeves sitting in his corridor, writing in his second notebook, reporting every 2 weeks to Gerald Plum, and receiving every 2 weeks the same variants of the same answer. Processing artifact, cross-referencing cycle, known anomaly, under review. He reported to a different supervising officer, a woman named Sandra Fielding, who ran a different administrative section, but had oversight over his posting during Plum's leave period. He brought the second notebook, and a summary he had typed up at home, using the same methodical approach he had once used to write incident reports in a place where getting the incident report wrong could get someone killed. Fielding read the summary. She was more careful than Plum. She asked several questions. She took the summary and said she would raise it with the document management team directly. 2 weeks later, she told him the document management team had reviewed his concerns and confirmed the discrepancies were consistent with known processing artifacts in the archive system. They used the same phrase, Reeves said, processing artifact. It's a technical term, Fielding said. I know it's a technical term. What I'm asking is whether the document management team gave you a specific explanation for the specific discrepancies I logged, or whether they gave you a general statement about the system. Fielding looked at him. She had the careful eyes of someone who was beginning to realize this conversation was going to require more attention than she had allocated to it. I'll follow up, she said. She did not follow up. This is also the part of the story where most people would have stopped, where the calculation becomes simple. You have reported it, you have been told it is nothing, you have no authority to take it further, and continuing to press is the kind of thing that gets noted in files and referenced in performance reviews and quietly shapes the assignments you receive for the next several years. The sensible thing, the thing that keeps a career clean and a life uncomplicated, is to accept the answer and sit back down in the chair. Reeves sat back down in the chair. He kept writing in the notebook. He had been keeping the notebooks for 4 months when Adiz Akaffer noticed. She was a junior administrative clerk, 26 years old, recently transferred to the Parliamentary Documentation Office from a posting in Leeds. She worked the early morning shift that overlapped with the last hour of Reeves's night shift. For the first month, they had exchanged nothing more than nods. The second month, she had started leaving a cup of tea from the break room on the small surface beside his chair on her way past, without being asked, and without explanation, in the same way that some people simply do practical things for other people, without making it a matter of discussion. Reeves had accepted the tea in the same spirit. One morning in February, she stopped beside his chair and looked at the notebook on his knee, not intrusively, just the look you give something that is not quite where you expected it to be. "What are you writing?" she asked. He told her, not the summary version he had given to Plum and Fielding, the full version, the specific numbers, the pattern he had identified, the rotation schedule he believed was operating. He had been over it so many times in his own head that it came out organized and clear in a way that sometimes surprised people, because they expected a night shift guard to speak in vague feelings and instincts, and what Reeves offered was dates, reference codes, a timeline, and a hypothesized mechanism. Adiz listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Who have you told?" she asked. He listed them: Plum, Fielding, 2 written reports submitted through the standard administrative channel that had generated acknowledgement receipts and no further response. And they all said processing artifact. Variations on it. She looked at the notebook. "Can I see the specific reference codes you flagged?" He showed her. She looked at them for a longer time than Plum had. She took out her own phone and typed 2 of the codes into it, which Reeves registered and did not comment on. "I can access the filing logs," she said. "Not the documents, but the logs record every time a document is accessed, by whom, at what time, and under what authorization code. If the documents are being physically altered, the paper versions, there would have to be an access record. Unless the access records are also being altered." She looked at him. "That would require a much higher level of access." "Yes," Reeves said, "it would." She thought about this, then she said, "Let me look at the logs." This is the moment that the story pivots on, though it doesn't look like a pivot. It looks like a 26-year-old clerk going back to her desk and opening a database she had legitimate access to as part of her job. It looks like routine. It looks like administration. It looks, from any angle that wasn't directly above it, like nothing at all. What she found took her 3 days to piece together because she was careful about it, and because she did not want to be wrong. The access records were intact. They had not been altered. This was, Reeves would later come to understand, the first mistake that the person responsible had made, or rather, the assumption they had made that turned out to be wrong. The assumption was that nobody would look at the access records in relation to these specific documents, because nobody had any reason to connect these specific documents to anything worth investigating. The assumption had been correct for a considerable period of time. The assumption had not accounted for a guard who wrote everything down and a clerk who knew how to read a filing log. What Adiz found was this: a specific authorization code appearing on the access records at irregular but patterned intervals, always late in the afternoon, always on days preceding a scheduled committee session, always the same code. The code belonged to a senior administrative officer in the Parliamentary Documentation Division named Martin Crossley, who had held his position for 16 years and who had, according to everything visible on the surface of his professional life, an entirely unremarkable record. Crossley had access to the physical archive chamber during administrative hours. He had legitimate reasons to access documents as part of his role. He had, over the course of approximately 14 months, been accessing a specific subset of documents at a frequency that was not consistent with his stated responsibilities, on a schedule that was consistent with the document change pattern Reeves had recorded in his notebooks. None of this was proof of anything on its own. What connected it to proof was a single entry in Reeves's second notebook. October 31st, 2217, reference code suffix 7743B. That suffix did not exist in the official inventory for that date. Reeves had written it down because it was on the inventory when he arrived, and he was writing everything down. When Adiz cross-referenced it against the access log, reference 7743B had been accessed by Crossley's authorization code at 1644 the same afternoon, 4 hours and 33 minutes before Reeves arrived for his shift. The document had been returned to the archive. The inventory Reeves received that evening listed the document correctly. By the time of the 6 o'clock handover the following morning, the inventory listed a different document in the same position. The document returned by Crossley at 1644 and the document listed on the morning inventory were not the same document. The substitution had happened during Reeves's shift, while Reeves was sitting in the corridor, while the door was sealed and the keypad was showing no entry, which meant either the door had been accessed without triggering the log, a significant security failure, or the substitution had happened before the chamber was sealed for the evening, in the window between Crossley's 4:44 access and the administrative lockdown at 9:30. It had not happened while Reeves was present. It had been timed to happen while the chamber was technically secured, but not yet under guard. Someone knew the schedule. 16 years in his position, Crossley knew every schedule in the building. Reeves took both notebooks, his typed summary, and the printed filing log extracts that Adiz had pulled with her supervisor's knowledge, and under the cover of a routine audit request, she had written carefully enough to be unremarkable, and he submitted them through a formal security referral channel that existed separately from the administrative reporting chain he had been using, a channel designed specifically for concerns about internal procedure, a channel that Gerald Plum and Sandra Fielding were not part of. He had known the channel existed. He had not used it initially because he had not been certain enough. He was certain now. The formal response came in 8 days, not from Gerald Plum, not from Sandra Fielding, from an office Reeves had never dealt with, staffed by people whose titles were administrative but whose questions were not. They asked him to walk them through the notebooks in detail. He did. They asked about the specific entry for October 31st. He showed them. They asked who else had been involved in pulling the filing logs. He gave them Adiz's name and said clearly that she had done nothing outside her legitimate access and had operated with appropriate supervisory awareness throughout. He said this before they asked any question about it, because he had thought about how that part of the conversation would go, and he wanted to set the context correctly from the start. They noted this. The investigation that followed took 4 months. Reeves was not part of it. He was not briefed on its progress. He returned to his posting, the same chair, the same corridor, the same fluorescent light that flickered when the heating came on. He drank coffee from his thermos at 2 in the morning. He started a third notebook because he had not been told to stop and he saw no reason to. He heard about the outcome the way most people at his level heard about outcomes in buildings like this, gradually, through the specific quality of silence that surrounds a conclusion. Crossley's name disappeared from the access authorization system. His office was reassigned. There was no announcement. There was never an announcement about these things. The building absorbed it the way large institutions absorb most corrections, quietly, thoroughly, with enormous preference for the appearance of continuity. Gerald Plum did not acknowledge what had happened the next time he saw Reeves. He said good morning. Reeves said good morning back. Sandra Fielding, 2 weeks after the investigation concluded, stopped Reeves in the corridor outside his posting. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he had seen before on the faces of people who have had to recalibrate something they thought they understood. The cross-referencing system, she said. Yes, Reeves said. It doesn't generate variant reference strings. No. There's no such thing as a processing artifact. In that context. No. She nodded once, in the way that people nod when they are not nodding at you, but it's something they are settling internally. Right, she said and walked on. Reeves went back to his chair. What nobody wrote up in any report, what did not appear in any of the formal documentation that Reeves was never shown, was the question of what Crossley had actually been changing. That answer existed somewhere in a file that was several clearance levels above a night shift guard's access. Reeves did not know the content. He had never needed to. He had not been trying to understand the documents. He had been trying to understand the pattern. The pattern was the thing. The pattern was always the thing. You did not need to know what a man was hiding to know that he was hiding something. You needed to know the shape of the hiding, the schedule, the rotation, the precise calibration of how much attention he believed he was safe from. What Crossley had not calculated was a man for whom the routine was not a way of switching off, but a way of paying attention. A man who had sat in dangerous silence before and learned that the silence told you things if you were willing to listen for long enough. There is a thing that happens in large institutions when a case like this concludes and the institution needs to go on functioning. The people who dismiss the concern do not typically acknowledge that they dismissed it. The process that failed to catch the problem does not typically acknowledge that it failed. The paperwork gets filed. The access codes get reset. The schedules get reviewed. And the person who found the thing, the person who sat in the chair night after night and wrote the numbers down when nobody asked them to and kept writing when they were told there was nothing to write about, that person goes back to their posting and is not spoken of in any meeting where the word oversight appears. Reeves was aware of this. He had been aware of it from approximately the third time Gerald Plum said processing artifact. He did not find it particularly troubling. He was not doing it for the acknowledgement. He had never been doing it for the acknowledgement. He was doing it because the numbers didn't match, and numbers that don't match mean something, and he was the one sitting in the corridor, and it was his corridor, and that was enough. 3 months after the investigation concluded, Reeves was eating lunch in the staff canteen when a man he didn't know sat down across from him. The man was perhaps 50. He had the kind of suit that was expensive without advertising itself, and the kind of face that had learned to give away nothing in rooms where giving away nothing was the admission price. He did not introduce himself. He said the notebooks. Reeves waited. 3 of them, the man said. Yes. You kept the third one after the referral. I kept all 3, Reeves said. I have copies. The man looked at him in a way that was not threatening. It was more like the look of someone encountering a species of behavior they had read about but not previously observed in its natural setting. "Why copies?" the man said. Reeves picked up his sandwich. "Same reason I kept 3 notebooks." The man sat with this for a moment. "There are guards at 4 other archive postings across Whitehall," he said. "Similar access structure, similar document categories." "I know," Reeves said. "I've met 2 of them in the shift handover rotations." "Would they be the kind of men who—" "I don't know," Reeves said. "I could talk to them." The man nodded. He stood up. He picked up his coffee cup in a way that suggested the meeting was concluding without it ever having officially begun. "The notebooks," he said, as a kind of goodbye. "The notebooks," Reeves agreed. He finished his sandwich. He went back to his posting. That evening, on his break, he took out his phone and sent a message to Patterson, the guard who smelled of institutional soap and who had been handing him the shift log for 11 months. He had looked into Patterson a little, the way he had quietly looked into a few people over the past year. Patterson was thorough, good-natured, and chronically underestimated by everyone above him. The message said, "Do you write anything down during your shifts?" Patterson replied 7 minutes later, "Just the log. Why?" Reeves thought about how to answer this in a way that was accurate and not alarming, and would give Patterson what he needed to make his own decision. He wrote, "The log is what they ask for. It's not the same thing as what's useful." There was a pause of about 4 minutes. Then Patterson wrote, "What should I be looking for?" Reeves thought about the first time he had noticed something wrong: the heating engaging, the flickering light, the reference numbers he had noted without knowing why. The years of reading landscapes for information and understanding that you did not always know what you were reading when you were reading it. He wrote, "Write down what you see, all of it, date everything, don't skip the things that seem unimportant." Another pause. "Okay," Patterson wrote, "I'll get a notebook." Reeves put his phone away. The corridor was quiet, the heating engaged. The light flickered once and settled. He opened the 3rd notebook to a fresh page. He wrote the date. He wrote the time. He wrote the reference numbers from the evening inventory in his clear, unhurried hand. He turned the page and waited for morning. Across Whitehall, in 3 other corridors outside 3 other archive chambers, 3 other men were sitting in 3 other chairs. By the end of the following month, 2 of them would have notebooks. By the end of the month after that, all 3. The silence in those corridors was the same silence as always. It was beginning to be listened to.